Okay, that's great. And I will start off by welcoming you all to session A5. And our conversation today is going to be, I'll put up my title screen here, is going to be relational learning and leading and creating community during COVID-19. And I am Sandra Davidson, and I'm joining you from Calgary, Alberta, Canada today. And where I'm very privileged and happy to be Dean and Professor in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. And just as a way to start, since we have a fairly small group that more people are joining. Maybe it's not so small. That's great. But maybe what I'll do is invite you in the chat just to give a sentence or two or a couple of words about what drew you to this session today or what context you're bringing. I don't know if we have, well, I know we have one other nurse in the room at least, but just a little bit about yourselves, what drew you here, what discipline or what frame you're coming to this conversation from would be helpful, I think, for all of us to kind of get to know what we're bringing. And we can do chat and breakout, right? Oh, thanks, Louise. Yeah, moving away from competition and measurement towards interrelated interbeing. Thank you. Yes, and Heather, I'm glad you're here because we're going to be talking about starting. I thought we could start with the conversation and a little bit of storytelling about when our faculty first encountered COVID and the changes that we underwent and how we kind of came together collectively in a community in that time of uncertainty, and we can jump off from that point. So please feel free to chime in about your perspective of how we navigated that. Oh, Ken, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. It's ditto. Ron, thanks. Oh, great. Graduate students. Yay. Thanks, huh? Awesome. This is wonderful. Thanks for putting that in the chat, and I'll kind of keep reading as we're going. And we have such an eclectic group. This is amazing. And we can talk about models and technology. I was going to focus initially more on technology. And then here we are, 2 years into this pandemic and having a conference on Zoom where it's old news. We all kind of live in this world now. Because I wrote the abstract back in June before the conference was postponed. And so a lot of things have transpired since then. But technology does create an opportunity for community, especially during COVID when we can't be together. So that will factor into it. I also noticed one of the other pieces that we use quite a bit to keep our connections together and have conversation and dialogue is Jamboards. And that's one of the other pieces that is on the conference website. I noticed the organizers and the our guides through this 3-day journey have a Jamboard where you can put stuff there. So we can talk a little bit about that. Oh yes, and I see that trauma-informed care, amazing work that needs to be done more than ever. And we have all kinds of different traumas happening through the living through COVID and experiencing what we are collectively. Oh, and University of Manitoba, fantastic, great. Welcome, Sunita. Okay, well, I am going to get going and share a little bit of the story, and I hope it'll leave plenty of time for us to have dialogue and conversation and kind of riffing off of kind of the themes that I hope to present that will intrigue and inspire or resonate with you. So I'm going to share my screen again here. Okay. There we go. So I wanted to start my story with some things that bring me here and that have inspired me as a leader and educator before COVID, but that I've drawn on heavily throughout COVID. And one of the stories that I want to start with is this idea of fireflies. And you know, the theme of the conference is education is relating, and fireflies I think are a biological exemplar of the power of being connected in community and in relationship. And I can't claim to have unearthed this story. It's actually in Sean Akers' book, Big Potential. If you haven't read it, I think it's very much in line with the conversation we're having at the conference about the, you know, personal and collective potential, and how, you know, each one of us is part of a community, and our own, you know, we're so trained to think about our own personal best and in competition with others. But if we think about education as relating, and the idea of how can each one of us be connected, and through that connection amplify everybody's own brilliance, is kind of his idea. And I think that's a really important concept in where we're going in education. So, you know, back in the 1930s, there was, you know, a lot of biological research being done at the time. And one of those researchers was working in mangroves and noticed this phenomenon of fireflies, and how, you know, as a lot of biological researchers do, thinking about, you know, how do fireflies get together and how do they reproduce and all those kinds of good things. Well, through dedicated study, come to find out that if there weren't a huge collection of fireflies, and there was only several, and their little lights were lighting up at random times, and they weren't coordinated, there was only a 3% likelihood that a female firefly would find a male firefly. However, what happened and what changed absolutely amazingly is when you have a collection of fireflies together and they're synchronizing their little beams of light, that statistic changes from the likelihood of mates finding each other from 3% to 87%. So I think that just really speaks to you know, the interconnectedness of community, and when we coordinate our efforts together, whether you're a firefly or a person in a classroom, you know, that sense of community is really important, and that translates to this idea of education is relating. And I think another important point is that when fireflies are able to link up, or we within community are able to link up, and we coordinate and collaborate with those around us, we all begin to shine brighter, and the chance of our success collectively, not only individually, increases. And the other piece that I wanted to mention, because I think this is really important in COVID times, is that fireflies, the community of fireflies, don't have to see everybody to create this coordinated effort, as long as no one group of fireflies is completely out of sight from any one group. They can sync up with each other's rhythms. So in other words, it only takes a few nodes to transfer to the entire system. And I know this morning, Ken, there was some conversation about the system transformation that needs to happen in education. So I love this idea of, you know, creating positive systems and becoming positive nodes, and shining your own light and connecting with others, so that we can all become better together. And I wanted to kind of start with that, because I think that's really a good reason. And from a leadership perspective, the more we as leaders, whatever that looks like for you, whether you're leading in a classroom or you're leading an organization, how can we as leaders be those positive nodes for others that maybe they don't see the whole network, and we're that one positive node that they have access to? How can we leverage our own sense of connection and inspire others to rise to the challenge and shine brighter. So I wanted to offer that as kind of like an opening inspiration, and wanted to talk a little bit about COVID. And the story that I'm going to tell is really around those early days of COVID in March of 2020. And like many of you, wherever you are in the world, I know COVID affected us in a cascade at slightly different times around the world. But when it hit, there were a lot of common features, particularly in education, I'll be so bold to say. And in our situation, you know, it was less than a week of time that went by from when we realized that COVID was a pandemic to our first positive case on our campus. To, you know, stopping all events, to, you know, saying don't come into the university. And then over a weekend, our faculty had to figure out how to transition teaching their, you know, traditional, you know, ways of being in a classroom or in a lab setting to online over a weekend, mid-semester. And that was a bit of a challenge. And so one of the theories that I like to draw on is a lot of the work of Otto Sharma from MIT. And he, you know, he kind of coined this phrase for a situation that is underdetermined, and I think the military uses it as well, but it's VUCA. So a situation that's volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. And I don't know about you, but that pretty well describes what we were living in the early days of COVID, and that we're still living to some degree. That you know, it really is unpredictable and changing, and the volatility because of the, you know, the human and health perspectives of it, and the social toll that it's taken. You know, the changing state of evidence, the ambiguity that we're having to walk through every single day. So just to highlight, you know, that we're in a situation in terms of the COVID context that the solution to the problem is unknown. And in those early days, we hadn't even thought vaccine. We were just, you know, putting on our seatbelts to figure out what was happening. The problem itself keeps changing. I mean, here we are in the fourth wave, definitely a changing problem. And that the stakeholders are not clear, or the stakeholder group is so diverse and diffuse that, you know, it's not like you can get the group of people in a room. So the stakeholders are many and very varied. So that was kind of a little bit of the context setting that this beginning story is in. And being that we're in an education conference, I'll go back a little bit. The other thing I wanted to say here is related to learning, whether you're learning as a leader or you're learning as a student or whatever your vantage point is. My question, or the question that I'm posing to all of you and that I've been pondering, is how do we learn in a situation that we've never experienced before, that is volatile and unpredictable and complex and ambiguous, and the evidence or what we seem to think we know keeps changing? And so a lot of our habitual ways of learning and coming to know things aren't particularly helpful. So the idea that Sharma puts forward that I really kind of clung to is this idea is learning from the future as it emerges. And to do that, we need a lot. It really ties in beautifully with relational leading, relational complexity theory in terms of relational being, all of those kinds of things. And so I put this little chart up here just as a way of framing the levels of learning that we know about in organizations, particularly the level of complexity in a situation that might be indicated by how we're using learning. So rather than, you know, just downloading and just going along as we always had because it's habit and routine, you know, and then the other end of the spectrum where I think COVID really fits is this emergent complexity that was very volatile, changing all the time. And, you know, double and single loop learning were probably not particularly helpful because there was nothing to hang it on. This was emerging as we were living it, as we were going. So it really speaks to that learning from the future as it emerges. And the response to change there really needs to be what Sharma talks about as presencing, right? So being in the, you know, physically, relationally, attuned to the living moment, basically, and looking for that future to emerge. There's a great sense of improvisation there, and really thinking of that emerging future as your improvisational partner, along with all the people that you're in that situation with. And, quite honestly, making it up as you go along, but with that sense, clear intentions of wanting to be better together, of wanting to persevere and become resilient through adversity, whatever it is. And I love that sense of presencing and learning from the future as it emerges, because it ties into our creativity and that ability to adapt and make it up as we go along. So again, going forward is that learning from the future as it emerges. And I'm just thinking of that emerging future as this sunset, and you're looking for those cues and those things to riff off of, and where is the energy going, and how can we leverage that and bring people along and invite them into the journey of learning from what's happening. So I put this up here again. This is Sharma's 2 cycles, and you'll see the presencing in the top circle there. And so this is really, I love this. And I don't know, Ken, I'm sure you've come across Sharma's work, but I just really see such resonance in this whole process of presencing and learning from the future as it emerges, and that whole idea of improvisation, that you're in that space, that you're seeing, you're sensing, you're in the moment, you're making sense of this with others, in conversation with others, and ultimately co-creating the reality and the context that you want to thrive in, right? And you'll see in the middle, the processes that kind of move forward in that is that sense of openness, right? So the courage to have an open will, that you don't know all the answers, but you're open to where things are going, that we hold a compassionate heart for ourselves and others as we're in that moment of presencing or that space, and that we are curious about where things are going. So now the counter to that is what Sharma talks about is absencing, right? So it's basically shutting down, moving forward from a place of fear or anger and ignorance. And you can see it's the antithesis of that building community and relationships. So, but I think, a lot of times, unfortunately, in our organizations, we probably have a lot more examples or lived experience of the absencing process than we do presencing. So I think that's a good counterpoint to just kind of see what is the opposite of presencing, to give context to where and how we want to be and show up, and the power of presencing and co-creating and building that community. So as I was thinking about Sharma's work, I was reading widely, and I'm sure many of you have come across Brene Brown's work as well. She takes a different tack, or comes at leadership and relational being from a different perspective. But I was finding this resonance between, as a leader, how do you always show or continually show up with an open will, the open heart, and the open mind. And that, it takes a lot of vulnerability. And that's where Brené's work comes in really being that daring to lead and leading with vulnerability, versus, the armored leadership, which is why I have the suit of armor here, which is akin to that absencing process, right? So shutting down and being fearful and not curious and closing off. And so just why we'll spend a lot of time on this, but you'll see the U space is really that presencing, and how that lines up with some of the concepts from Brené with daring leadership, and then really how anti-space and armored leadership are really resonant with each other as well. So for the purposes of, really building community, having that open mind. And I think the daring leadership pieces here really makes so much sense related to this conference, being a learner and getting it right, trying until you get it right and being curious, all of those things go into that, making contributions and taking risks, right? That's where the learning happens, rather than, criticism as a self-protection and, always needing to be right. In COVID, we could not always be right. There was just no way. It was making contributions and taking risks, right? And from that open heart perspective, leading from the heart, practicing gratitude, celebrating milestones and victories. And I think in the pandemic, whether it was March 2020 or today, finding those ways to celebrate those small victories, those milestones is really, really important, more so now than ever. And the open will, from a leadership perspective, power with and power to and power within is really what we're talking about, rather than traditional power over. And, through COVID, continuing to create that culture of belonging, inclusivity, and diverse perspectives, because heaven knows we need as many diverse perspectives as we can to figure this out and to continue to persevere. Okay, so enough of that. The context theory, we've kind of done that, so you have some things to think about for your own journeys. But this is really the story that I wanted to tell a little bit, particularly is this was the week that we went from, oh my gosh, COVID is a thing, don't come to campus. Okay, you have to learn to teach online overnight and completely switch your class. This was in the midst of that. And we actually in the Faculty of Nursing have a mental health and wellness engagement committee. That's one of our priorities and strategic directions, is really making sure that our faculty, our staff, and students, we prioritize our mental health and wellness. So this committee was meeting at the beginning of COVID, and they were going to, think about ideas about staying connected and building supports and those sorts of things. And the meeting took a very different turn, and it became the fear was palpable. People's exhaustion and confusion and anxiety was front and center. And so this was the email that I got from the director of mental health and wellness, right? So there was this whole sense of, this is not business as usual. We don't know what we're doing. The workload is too much. People's lives, their kids are home from school. The complexity is just crazy. People are exhausted. They're tapped out. They need a pause. They need to take a breath. But at this point, that was not an opportunity, because we needed to keep going. We had hundreds of students that were relying on us to figure this out and keep going. And not to mention, particularly in nursing, those patients that we serve as well, and what was happening in the healthcare system. So there was just this collective sense of anxiety and frustration and exhaustion. And so this came to me as a leader. And I have to tell you, I was in the same boat. As a leader, I was feeling all of these things. And I saw this email come through, and this is just a snippet. It was much longer. But there was just this sense of, and this picture just represents what I felt. It was just bleak and downtrodden. And I felt viscerally the comments that people were making. But as a leader, I felt, what do I do with this? I don't have the answers. This is, it's unprecedented, but so desperately wanting to help my team. So I slept on it because I was exhausted too. And I talked to some key folks that were on that committee and in the faculty to just hear more about what was happening in the context of this, and tell me, I was modeling curiosity. Tell me more about this. What's happening, to try and get a sense of what I could possibly do as a leader to support this team and this community in a very tough time. And so in my frustration, in a conversation with one of my colleagues, I said, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't kind of know where this will be in a couple months. And the person stopped. We were on the phone at the time, and they said, well, Sandra, why don't you just say that? And it was like this aha moment of, yeah, this is VUCA. Everything's complex and underdetermined and ambiguous. Why am I feeling as a leader that I need to have all the answers when there aren't any answers? So I'll read you, I'll put on a happier picture so you're not looking at something depressing while I'm reading this. But I basically wrote an open letter to all of the faculty in response to what I was hearing. And so I'll just read a snippet of it. I won't go through the whole thing because I want to have time for us to chat. So I said, greetings one and all. I hope you and your families are well and safe in this time of COVID. I can appreciate what an overwhelming time we are in. So many are doing double and triple duty, family, work, and school, and more. The situation status changes daily, and we are left feeling like there is little we're actually in control of. This is obviously disconcerting for a group of professionals, such as nurses, that pride ourselves on being calm, cool, and in control. I was reminded today of a quote that I've used throughout my career, and I think this situation fits it well. And it's a quote from Viktor Frankl. And he says, everything can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given sense of circumstance, to choose one's own way. This is a humbling time as well, where it is clear that we, humanity, are interconnected to each other, both globally and locally. The precautions we take now are not for any one of us, but for all of us. As a leader, I can tell you, I don't have all the answers. I so wish I did. We are building the plane as we're trying to fly it. And I wish I could say it will all be okay. And I wish I could deploy supports and resources that would ease the stress and burden of each one of you is facing. I can't. What I can do is be honest, vulnerable, and open and hopeful. I am confident that the decisions that are being made at the university are always made in the lens of safety and concern for our university community. I know that we are utilizing the best evidence and information available to make those decisions. Although it is rapidly evolving, this situation, and information evidence change quickly, your patience and understanding for the ever-changing nature of the situation is so appreciated. Your leadership team is engaged, coordinated, informed, and doing our darndest every day to navigate the situation with as much grace and humility and collective wisdom as we can muster. And as one of my modern time heroes, Brene Brown, recently put it so well, and it was from a podcast that I had listened to from Brene. She says, the pandemic experience is a massive experiment in collective vulnerability. We can be our worst selves when we're afraid, or our very best, bravest selves. In the context of fear and vulnerability, there is often very little between, because when we are uncertain and afraid, our default is self-protection. We don't have to be scary when we're scared. Let's choose awkward, brave, and kind. Let's choose each other. So with that awkward vulnerability in mind, let me say this. COVID-19 is full of awkward first situations for all of us. What Brene would call effing first times, FFTs. So whether it's moving your teaching from face-to-face to online in the blink of an eye, homeschooling and working your day job while your spouse or partner also is working from home or has been laid off, how to deal with family and loved ones being in locations across the world in this scary time, or self-isolating because they just returned home from abroad. Fear of our own personal safety and those we love and care about. I do know this situation will not last forever, and we will one day return to normal, whatever that might look like by then. And here we are 2 years later, and we're still not back to normal. I do know we're in for a bit of a marathon. We're likely to be in this for a period of months. Oh, so naive, right? And we need to set a rhythm akin to a marathon runner because we've been behaving like it's a sprint, and we just couldn't do that. So anyway, I go on to say, how can we be here for each other and choose each other, and celebrate small successes and small wins. And fast forward, what you see here on the screen is our very first Faculty of Nursing, a virtual happy hour. And we've kind of held things like this since this time, and as a way to come together and be in community, even though we are disconnected, and share. One of the other things that came out of that first initial email and response, we've had regular town halls throughout the pandemic, as often as every week, every 2 weeks. Now I think we're doing it once a month, just to stay connected. And with the changing dynamics, what are the issues that are coming up? How can we support each other? Just connecting and celebrating successes wherever they pop up. So, I think I want to say there is, it was very nerve-wracking to write that very open, kind of vulnerable email. And it was going to go one of two ways. I was going to get that response of absencing, where people would shut down and blame me as the leader for not having all the answers. That was my imagined possible scenario. But what happened is the number of folks that reached out to me, email, text saying, my gosh, thank you. You just said it. And thank you for being open and, just telling us the truth and, creating this sense of how we can move forward together. And honestly, I share this with you because I think it was a very pivotal piece for our faculty that set the stage for everybody, and everybody kind of picked up, how can we be there for each other? And, I look around us at our other faculties in the university and some of the challenges and turmoil and angst that's still happening. And I think because we were able to come together as a community early on, we haven't had as many bumps in the road with some of the twists and turns in COVID that other faculties have. And I see Heather's nodding, so I'm not just imagining that. But there's that sense of, yeah, we're working hard and it's changing and we have to muster all the creativity we have, but we have each other's backs and we're supporting each other and our students and we get through it together. So to start off, here's just a couple of things, some take-home messages, I guess, from that experience. And I won't talk through all of them, but courage is contagious. I'll skip to that at the bottom. That if you, as a leader, as an educator, if you put it out there, whether you're courageous to be vulnerable or courageous to say something that is, not mainstream. It allows others to have that space to see what's possible. Think back to the lightning bugs, right? And we are wired for social and emotional contagion. And so whatever we can do to be that positive node to spread hope, optimism, and celebration versus fear and anxiety, it really is, it is a contagion and it makes a difference. So again, moving back to that positive node piece, and how can we individually do that to influence positively the world we want to co-create? So I will stop this. So I will stop there. I have one kind of final thing that I can do at the end, but I wanted to just, I'm curious to hear other people's stories as leaders, as educators through COVID. If you have questions about any of the content or the theory that I talked about or want to riff on that, I open it up for a conversation for the next little while.
Can you speak a little bit about the student experience or how you handle this impacted on the student in the classroom?
Yes. So we also held town halls with our students. So just as we were holding town halls with our faculty and staff, we had specific student town halls. And just hearing a lot about their concerns, their fears and anxieties, and acknowledging them. I think it's, again, it became very obvious very quickly that it's not just nurses who like certainty, but nursing students like certainty. So it was a very highly teachable moment to say, you're really not, none of us are really in control of this, but here's how we think we can get through it together. And we don't know everything, but this is what we know. And we will, creating that sense of, okay, this is as far on the horizon as we can see right now. But as we know the next step, we will let you know what that next step is, because we had students that, had been taken away from their clinical settings initially. And, we had faculty members making up Zoom experiences that were similar to clinical, using virtual simulation in lieu of face-to-face, clinical learning with patients. And I think we were really creative in finding ways to have meaningful patient interaction, even though we couldn't physically be with patients. So one of the examples that came up so that we could keep our students moving through their academics, because we knew we needed more nurses, we couldn't stop educating nurses, is we actually partnered with some of our primary healthcare. So primary care offices in the community, primary care networks we have here in Alberta. And they were just overwhelmed with folks that they needed to see and provide care for. So our students in their clinical group started doing virtual check-ins with patients, and simple assessments that they could do, whether it was a mental health assessment or doing some patient teaching virtually. And our faculty kind of jumped on that and found ways to do that. We also looked at opportunities for how to be part of the solution in terms of what am I trying to say? Contact tracing. So, that was an opportunity that in no time previous had our nursing students had the opportunity to participate in contact tracing and that kind of public health initiative. And so we partnered. It didn't end up actually working out, but a lot of our faculty and staff and students got to be trained in contact tracing that they then actually went on and did later. So really that was that learning from the future as it emerges. And our students really stepped up to that once they kind of, and I think there was a lot of support from the instructors and modeling. We don't know what's coming next, but this is what we can make of it. And this is what is working. And let's do more of that. Is kind of the sense. I don't know, Heather, if you want to talk more about the other experiences that you saw from a student perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I was teaching a lecture. I also had a son who was in our nursing program, so I got to see both. And one thing we did is we had each of the instructors who wanted to participate in the mental health and wellness project just hosted Zoom time. So an hour a week, I just hosted undergrad questions. And so undergrad students could just join in, and I ended up having a consistent group throughout the entire spring and summer. And it was just this social opportunity for them to ask questions about the program, because of course they're worried. And then I get, I have a little bit more connection to maybe what the faculty is thinking, and just having a sense of community. Our students also couldn't get summer jobs. And that was stressful. So I work in international global health. So I've connected in with our newcomer and refugee population, and we could meet outside. So I just invited whatever students wanted to just join me once a week in a park. We'll invite we have a refugee community close to where I live. And so we just would offer English classes, English hangouts, conversation time, and our students could learn about building relationships with newcomers and refugees. And so this was just a really fluid time of really wanting to care for our students, but recognizing that the best way when you're in stress is actually to give and to connect. And so finding ways to be able to do that. And I have to say, working under Sandra's leadership, where she trusts us to risk and try things, and you try 3 things, you try 5 things, and 1 thing will work. You don't feel bad about the 4 that didn't work. And Sandra and I sat on a number of kind of ad hoc committees, where we would just invite the community, broader than just our faculty, to use their gifts and talents and really interests to benefit the community. So it was actually really exciting. But it was also having a son who was in nursing and watching the stress of the sudden shift to online. I think there was also a need to recognize our students were not at their best. And some of us can teach online, but it's 4 times the work to teach well is exhausting, and to learn well is also exhausting. So to give our students some grace when they were not at their best, and to try to make those decisions on the fly was really, really challenging, but I felt very supported in doing so.
And I think speaking of our student experience, so we have undergraduate students that are pre-licensure nurses, but we also have our graduate students, and we're a faculty of nursing. So all of 99% of our graduate students are practicing nurses. So speaking of giving grace and supporting our students, the graduate students were those nurses that were in emergency rooms and ICUs and community settings and long-term cares, in addition to being graduate students. And the most interesting thing for me is, giving them that grace, due dates out the window, tell me what you need to get through this. And how can we make, it was a great opportunity create a learning experience where students could take what their experience in their real life day-to-day practice was and bring that to the virtual classroom or a paper that they were writing and make sense of it. And the most interesting comment I think we had from graduate students, and it was so amazing to me that we didn't have as we had some deferrals, we had some people stop their programs, but by and large, they kept going. And I was very curious about it. So I was talking to the graduate students that I was teaching at the time, and they said, coming to this class and talking about things that are future focused, it was a leadership class, and, thinking about the future and being hopeful. They said it was self-care. So they said, I wouldn't dare stop this because this is my sanity. This is where I cannot think about work. I can, my husband or my partner takes the kids and I'm here in this Zoom room for an hour and I can think about exciting, curious things with like-minded people. And it was like this little safety net. And I just thought that was such an interesting take on how education can be self-care in the time of COVID. That question was loaded. I know we had so many different parts of it, but thank you for asking that. Other comments or thoughts?
Hey Sandra, this is Emily in Oregon. I'm just wondering how we maintain this focus on community and relationships going forward, because we needed this before the pandemic. Both education and healthcare have some of the highest rates of burnout of any profession. Yeah. And then we saw what happened during the pandemic and the impact. And so we've built this focus on community, and how do we keep it going forward when the demands come back and there's a pull away from it again?
Oh, that is the $1 million question, Emily. And, I think one of the slides that I had up and one of the ideas that I hold to is that, basically by showing up each day, making the choice to focus on community and building that, and that practicing the presencing, right? And being those positive nodes. And that has to be done intentionally, because the minute you draw attention away from it, things go back to the way they were, right? So it's this way of being, and you have to show up with that intentionality and that presence to recreate that day over day over day. And it needs to become a new habit. And I think through COVID, it has had to become a habit. I mean, it's not perfect. We all have bad days where we're not at our best, but hopefully then there's another bright node in our community that we can see their light flicker and we're like, oh yeah, that's where we need to be going, right? And we lift each other up. And I think, systematizing that or making it a part of our culture and ways of being is what my answer would be. It's not easy work, but it's important work. And it's almost like the more effort and time we put into building and maintaining those connections and growing them, the less issues we have because of, fear and anxiety or lack of information flow. So it's almost like this self-perpetuating thing is that, and I kind of, that's my comment about, because we have created this sense of community and connection and, curiosity and try things out and moving forward, our faculty hasn't had as many setbacks in the last 6 months as some other faculties because of that community building and that network that we have. So it starts to build on itself, I guess, but not to say that it's easy. And it's, that choice every morning to wake up and say, okay, I got to set these patterns. I have to, bring that sense of presence, open heart, open mind, open will, as best I can to the interactions that I have. But I think, to that, I'll just say as leaders, I think it's important work, and we can set the table for others to be able to do that work and make it possible, right? So we talk about it, we make it a priority, and we give time to it, and that signals that there's value in it and it's worth doing, right? So making that time to have those meetings and making time to have conversations around, how is everybody doing, a mental health check, and what other supports do we need to put in place. I mean, one of the things that we did, we started looking at it pre-pandemic, but then during the pandemic, it was really a need. We actually, because you can imagine, I know one of you was talking about trauma-informed care. And you think about, to Heather's comment, we had nursing students and faculty and graduate students that were out there seeing this, vicarious trauma and experiencing like horrible things happening in healthcare, in long-term care. And so we put supports in place. We actually have a mental health and wellness nurse practitioner just for our faculty, because we needed somebody, our students and our faculty needed somebody with that healthcare context that could understand what they were grappling with and provide contextually relevant support. As opposed to just the general university wellness center that didn't have a clue about nursing or the work that we were doing or what our students were seeing. So, by listening and hearing, and Heather's comment about just having an open forum with the students and hearing what they're saying, what are their concerns, what are their anxieties, and then, from Heather's vantage point and her instructors, the beautiful thing is then they would let me know and say, hey, just a heads up, this is the prevailing question of the week. What can we do to get in front of this and provide supports? Or, this happened in clinical, this group is going to need extra support in this area. And really just trying through that connection and sense of community to learn from the future as it emerges. As things came up, we figured out how to support and do the best we could to move forward.
I love hearing about the peer support model. You're talking about that contextually relevant support, and I feel that too as a mental health practitioner, like sending professionals to therapists who don't understand the profession does not alleviate burnout, because it takes so much energy to explain your experience versus bringing together peers who instantly get it to have that conversation. It's so much faster and so much more effective. So thank you for sharing your model.
And Emily, it's interesting. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of, or we have seen, is with healthcare practitioners going to, providers that don't really have the context, in telling their story, they're re-traumatized.
Yes.
Because they're, and so that's the other thing that, I think the peer support model comes from. And one of the other things we set up for, anybody in the nursing community is we have just a virtual peer support group for just nurses to come together, whether you're a student, a faculty, whether you have any affiliation at all with the faculty of nursing, didn't matter. It was just another venue for nurses to come together and talk with other nurses in that peer support kind of way and that sense of connection. So that's still going today.
Awesome, thank you.
It seems to me, Sandra, you could add to Sharma's theory. He does sensing as if it's a personal thing. Seeing is the personal, but you've really got co-seeing, co-sensing, and then you built a kind of relational infrastructure to help that happen. And those are really, really important. Not just me seeing as the leader, it's like we all do it. And there's another piece of it that's somehow not quite there in Sharma either, and that is that you act into the flux. It's not just seeing it and sort of, I am now, immersed in change and I don't know what to do, but you actually encourage, let's try that. Someone try that. See how that works. It's a proactive co-creation of the future and then learning as you go.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you. It's just when you're in it, you sometimes you don't.
Yeah, I know.
You don't name it, so it's just so interesting to hear different as people are hearing the story yourself and seeing that. And yeah, I would say we are really proactive, and there's that everybody has a permission slip. Not that we need permission slips, but there's some symbolic value to say go and try, as a leader, to say go and try it. Let me know how that goes and let me know what you need. And so people are more willing to do that and try things. And that's that proactive piece. And I think, from a a discipline of nursing and working in healthcare, I think one of our strengths that really came forward is that nurses are extremely proactive. and so we've leveraged that in a different sort of way, that disciplinary blueprint, I guess, to just want to intervene before something bad happens or get ahead of things. And we're doing this in a totally different realm and co-creating this as we go together in our work. And it's and the other thing from that, it's just interesting, we did a mental health, we did a Guarding Minds survey, which is kind of looking at workplace wellness and how engaged folks are, how safe they feel, just all of that in terms of organizational health and wellness. And we did it in March of 2019. And then we did it again in March of 2020 in the faculty. And there's different metrics that, as much as you can trust surveys and that kind of thing in this topsy-turvy world. But one of the things that stuck out to me is that one of the indicators was level of engagement. And the level of engagement of our faculty from 2019 to 2020, during a pandemic where we can't physically be together, the engagement scores actually went up. And that was so curious to me. And it was, really speaking to, but again, people were coming. We had the best turnout we've ever had at our faculty council meetings because it was on Zoom and people didn't physically have to get across the city to be there. And they had the time to kind of show up and have these conversations. And as Heather said, the one-off groups. And so, yeah, people were engaged but not in a traditional sense. And it was just so interesting to see that happen in this context of what we think of as disconnection, that the engagement of the faculty actually went up.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Sandra, I was late coming to your talk, but it was very enlightening and I feel very validated by hearing what you've done. I think it's really unusual what you're saying about the faculty engagement. I'm in British Columbia, so I'm very close to you.
Mm-hmm.
I did not feel that faculty engagement when I tried to do some innovative pieces in the social work department in social work field. But I did reach out to the ethics department, the research department, and the IT department, and we formulated this incredible collaborative community that was most collegial that I've never experienced before. So I'm curious, I think it's really important that we're igniting curiosity, not only with our students, but with our colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you did this brilliantly and so creatively.
Kathy, it was very emergent. Very emergent. And as Heather said, we sat on many an ad hoc committee of just, we don't know where this is going, but we'll turn up and see what happens. and it was through that modeling of, okay, we're in a pandemic, nobody knows what this is supposed to be, let's just make it up, and modeling that and reaching out. But as I said, it is a challenge, and you have to be purposeful about it, right? And so it's disheartening to hear that you didn't have a similar experience, and it was really challenging.
Well, the experience was great. I did partner up with Julie Drolet from the University of Calgary social work department and used a lot of her innovative, incredible ideas, and used a lot of Ken's stuff and Sheila McNamee's stuff. But it did work out, and the student engagement was beyond belief.
That's great.
Which is, I didn't expect. But I think it speaks to how do we ignite curiosity and co-create creativity and community and collaboration to move outside the box that academia is so entrenched in.
Yep. And this is that great opportunity. Things have been disrupted. And I think it was Emily, you said, how do we maintain this when things go back to normal, that we don't just fall into old habits? And so this is this opportunity. We've been disrupted. There's all this creativity. And then I think the next challenge for all of us, whether you're a teacher or a leader or both, or in an organization, is how do we keep those great things that have developed through this and not just go back to what we thought was easier, because it's not going to be the same it'll be this weird hybrid version of a future reality. But the golden days are gone, right? And new possibilities and new opportunities have emerged, not so gracefully sometimes because of the pandemic, but there's a silver lining there that, broke a lot of things structurally, which makes space for new things to come to be, which I think is where that curiosity and creativity are even more important, to take that to the next level. So I'm seeing we have just a few minutes left, and I'll one other story that I just love that I wanted to kind of share is it's a story actually that I read years ago in the Houston Chronicle. And does everyone know who Yitzhak Perlman is? Yeah, so wonderful, brilliant violinist. And so I love this story because it reminds me of that improvisational nature of seeing what you can make of something and what can come from that. So here's a little story that Jack Reimer of the Houston Chronicle talks about one night when Yitzhak Perlman was giving a concert back in the early 2000s. So what happened is he comes out onto the stage, and as many of you will know, Yitzhak Perlman had polio, excuse me, as a child. And so he wears leg braces. And so he uses his braces and he comes out into the middle of the stage and sits down and gets his violin in his hands and is ready to play. And he gets just 30 seconds in and his violin string breaks. And so everybody expects that you're going to see him get up out of his chair, put his leg braces on, go to the edge of the stage and get another violin. But that's not what happened. He took a minute and he paused, and then he asked the conductor to start again. And here's the description of what the audience experienced. He played with passion, power, and purity. Everyone knew it was impossible to play a symphonic work with 3 strings, but Yitzhak Perlman did not know that. You could see him modulating, changing, recomposing the piece in his head. There was an awe-filled silence in the room, and people rose and cheered. Everyone was cheering, showing how much they appreciated what he had done. He smiled, wiped the sweat from his brow, raised his bow, and said to us in a quiet, pensive, and reverent tone, sometimes it's the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left. And to me, that is the epitome of co-creating, of being in the moment and bringing it all together in a way that you never thought you could. So thanks for joining. I know we're just about out of time, but that's my favorite Yitzhak Perlman story. And do what you can with the strings you have left. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Much
Sandra.
gratitude.
Have a great conference, everybody.